The sun blazed relentlessly overhead as I scavenged through the remnants of a once thriving city, searching for anything that might help my family survive another day. I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my hand, the dust and grime sticking to my skin like a second layer. "Lily, look at this," I called out, lifting a dented can of beans from the rubble. "And it's still sealed." My wife Lily, pregnant and just starting to show, walked over, her face beaming. "That's great, Thomas. It'll be a nice change from the usual fare. What, you don't enjoy my roach and water soup?" Her laughter was music to my ears. It had been nearly 2 years, as far as I could tell, since the Great Collapse. It was hard to keep track after a while. And though we were surrounded by devastation, we still managed to find moments of joy in the simple things. As we continued our search, I couldn't help but think back to the life we once had. The memories of laughter, love, and stability seemed like a distant dream, overshadowed by the desolate world we now inhabited. "Remember our Sunday picnics in the park?" Lily asked, her voice tinged with nostalgia. I smiled. "Of course I do. Those were the days. But we'll make new memories, Lily. I promise." We continued our search for useful supplies. We came across an old man sitting on a battered wooden crate. His face was weathered, a testament to the hardships he had faced in this unforgiving world. He was quietly humming a tune that seemed vaguely familiar, a melody from a time before the Great Collapse. Excuse me, sir," I said, approaching him cautiously. "We don't mean to intrude." The old man looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a surprising warmth. "No intrusion, son. Just been a while since I've seen another soul." We exchanged pleasantries, and soon enough, he began to share his story. He had once been a teacher, but when the world fell apart, he found himself wandering the wasteland, searching for a place to call home. "You know, there's a safe haven up north," he said, his voice turning into barely over a whisper. "I've heard tell of it from other travelers. They say it's a place where people are rebuilding their lives, where there's still hope. They call it." He leaned in, and we moved closer. "Boston." We both stared at the man a moment before he let off a dry chuckle, hoarse with dehydration. "Oh, come on. What'd you think it'd be? Something like New Haven or Eden?" He began coughing and needed to take a sip from a canteen that hung around his waist. "Look, sir, I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "No game. No game, son," he said, waving his hand to cut me off. "Look, Boston really is, as far as I've heard, thriving. Thriving as much as any one place can thrive in these times. Running water, crops, some electricity even." Lily's eyes widened at the mention of hope, something that was in short supply these days. "Have you been there yourself?" she asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. The old man shook his head. No, I haven't. My old bones can't handle the journey. But I've met folks who've been there, and they say it's the real deal." "How far is it?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "About 2 weeks' travel on foot, if you're lucky," he replied. "But be warned, it's a dangerous path. And you know there are things out there, things that'll make your blood run cold." Before I could ask a follow-up question, Lily squeezed my hand, her determination unwavering. "We have to try, Thomas, for the baby's sake." I looked at the old man, searching for any hint of deception in his eyes, but all I saw was sincerity. "Thank you for the information, sir. We appreciate it." He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "Good luck to both of you." May you find the haven you seek. As we prepared for our journey, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The road ahead would certainly be filled with unknown dangers, but the prospect of a better life for our child was too compelling to ignore. We knew that the old man's words might be our last and only chance at a brighter future. That night, as we huddled together for warmth, we discussed our plan, weighing the risks and rewards of our decision. Ultimately, we knew that we couldn't raise our child in the desolate wasteland we currently called home. With our resolve strengthened, we set off the next morning, leaving our small refuge behind. As we ventured into the desolate landscape, our hearts were filled with hope, guided by the promise of a better life that awaited us in the north. With the old man's words echoing in our minds, Lily and I embarked on our journey northward. The desolate landscape stretched out before us, a vast expanse of cracked earth and the skeletal remains of long-dead trees. The unforgiving sun beat down on us as we trekked through the wasteland, our bodies aching from the effort and the unrelenting heat. As we ventured further from the familiarity of our home, we were met with the harsh and unforgiving terrain. The land itself seemed to work against us, with jagged rocks that threatened to cut through our worn shoes, and loose, sandy soil that made each step a struggle. The air was dry and choked with dust, a constant reminder of the desolation that surrounded us. Clouds of fine particles would rise with every step, making it difficult to breathe and coating our throats with a gritty residue. The climate was just as cruel as the landscape. During the day, the sun scorched our skin and sapped our energy. Despite covering ourselves with whatever scraps of cloth we could find, the sunburn still found its way to us, leaving our skin red and raw. At night, the temperature would plummet, and we would shiver beneath our thin blankets, our bodies craving the warmth that seemed so far away. But we pressed on, driven by the hope of a better life for ourselves and our unborn child. Along the way, we encountered other survivors, each with their own stories of loss and perseverance. One evening, we came across a family huddled together for warmth in the remains of a burnt-out building. The mother, thin and weary, told us about the slavers who had taken her eldest son and the desperate search that had led them through the unforgiving wasteland. Another day, we stumbled upon a small camp of survivors who had managed to construct a makeshift greenhouse from scavenged materials. The plants inside were weak and wilted, but they provided a small source of sustenance for the group. They shared their meager harvest with us, a welcome respite from the canned and dried food we had been subsisting on. Despite the kindness of some, we also encountered those who had let the harsh world twist their souls. We narrowly avoided a group of raiders who hunted the weak and the desperate, preying on the survivors who had been cast adrift in the desolate landscape. We watched from afar as they raided a camp, screams echoing through the abandoned city. As we traversed the wasteland, we began to notice strange markings on the ground and the twisted remains of animals and humans alike. These grim discoveries filled us with dread, as our thoughts went back to what the old man was saying about things out here that were so horrifying our blood would run cold. What could he have meant? One night, as we huddled together in the darkness, we heard the faint sound of whispers in the wind. "We have to be careful, Thomas," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "Whatever's out there, I feel like it's watching us." I tightened my grip on the makeshift weapon I had fashioned from scavenged materials, my eyes scanning the darkness. "We'll be ready for it, Lily. I won't let anything happen to you or the baby. I promise." The harsh terrain continued to test our resolve as we forged onward in the morning. We scaled steep hills, their slopes littered with loose rocks that threatened to send us tumbling down. We navigated our way through narrow, winding canyons, the oppressive walls closing in on us and leaving us feeling trapped and vulnerable. All the while, the wind whispered its sinister secrets, a haunting melody that never seemed to leave us in peace. On the 5th day of our journey, we stumbled upon a dried-up riverbed. We followed it, hoping that it might lead us to some source of water or a path through the unforgiving terrain. As we walked, we noticed more horrifying signs of something, is all I can say. Claw marks gouged into the earth, the half-devoured remains of a deer, and the eerie silence that seemed to accompany these grim discoveries. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to lengthen and twist as we ventured deeper into the riverbed. The wind picked up, moaning like a grieving spirit and casting clouds of dust and debris into our faces. We wrapped our scarves around our mouths and noses, trying to shield ourselves from the choking dust. "We need to find shelter," I shouted over the howling wind, my voice barely audible. "We won't last long out here." Lily nodded, her face pale and drawn. She clung to my arm, her grip tight with fear. We stumbled through the riverbed, our eyes searching for a sign of refuge from the relentless wind and the unseen terror that seemed to follow us. We followed a small path up out of the riverbed to the side of a cliff. We found a small cave carved into the side of the canyon, and we hurried inside, grateful for the temporary respite from the desolation outside. As we huddled together, the wind shrieking like a banshee outside our meager shelter, I tried to reassure Lily. "We'll be safe here for now," I whispered, my voice quivering with exhaustion. We'll rest, and then we'll continue our journey north. We're getting closer, Lily. I can feel it." Lily nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and terror. "I know. We have to keep going, Thomas. We have to." That night, I got little sleep. As days turned to weeks, we grew more accustomed to the rigors of our journey. Our bodies grew lean and strong, hardened by the constant struggle of survival. Our spirits, however, were another matter. The ever-present threat of a supposed horrifying entity, the constant reminder of the brutal world we now inhabited, and coming across camps that we knew had been raided and pillaged. It all took a toll on our minds. What little light in the darkness there was came from the fact that we were finding signs directing us towards Boston. Finally, we knew that we were indeed on the right track. We did continue to encounter other survivors who shared stories of horror and hope as we traveled together for brief stretches of time. The friendships we forged along the way were bittersweet, as we knew that the likelihood of seeing these kindred spirits again was slim, but their strength and resilience bolstered our own, and we continued onward, our hearts set on reaching the safe haven that we had been promised. It was day 12 into our journey, and we continued through terrain that was growing increasingly treacherous, with sheer cliffs and deep ravines. We navigated the perilous paths with caution, aware that one misstep could be our last. We were in a region notorious for bandits and slavers, and every rustle in the bushes or distant whisper on the wind set my nerves on edge. One night, as we rested in a shallow cave near a steep cliff, a group of slavers descended upon us. They must have been watching us for some time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moonlight cast eerie shadows on the rocky walls as they approached, their dark silhouettes growing ever larger. I could see the cold, cruel eyes of the slavers as they surveyed us with a predatory gleam, and I knew at once that we were in grave danger. I roused Lily from her sleep, whispering gently for her to stay quiet and move deeper into the cave. I could see the fear in her eyes, but she nodded, understanding the severity of the situation. I kissed her forehead and promised her that everything would be all right before turning to face our attackers. As the slavers drew closer, I could make out their ragged, mismatched armor and the wicked gleam of their makeshift weapons. They carried bats studded with nails, crude metal blades, and other barbaric instruments that bore the scars of countless brutal encounters. I gripped a jagged piece of rebar, the closest weapon at hand, and braced myself for the fight that was about to ensue. I knew the odds were against us, but I would do everything in my power to protect Lily and drive these monsters away. The first slaver lunged at me with a snarl, his nail-studded bat swinging through the air. I deflected his strike with my rebar, the impact sending shockwaves up my arm. I countered with a swift, powerful blow, aiming for his head, but the slaver was agile, dodging my attack and swinging his weapon at me once more. We traded blows, our weapons clashing with a cacophony of metal and wood, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I fought for our lives. Despite my efforts, the slavers were relentless, and their numbers were overwhelming. One by one, they managed to land their strikes, each blow sending a searing pain through my body. I fought with every ounce of strength I had left, but it was not enough. In the midst of the chaos, a burly slaver emerged from the shadows, his cruel eyes locked on mine. He wielded a makeshift mace, a heavy metal ball adorned with jagged spikes affixed to a chain. He swung the weapon in a wide arc, and as I tried to dodge, the chain wrapped around my rebar. With a vicious yank, he disarmed me, leaving me defenseless. I stumbled back, and the slaver charged at me, a guttural roar echoing through the night. Before I could react, his massive boot collided with my chest, and I felt a sudden, intense pain as the air was forced from my lungs. The world spun around me as I was propelled backward, off the edge of the cliff, into the abyss of darkness below. The last thing I remember was the sound of Lily's desperate screams echoing in my ears as I fell into the inky blackness. I awoke at the bottom of the cliff, my body throbbing with pain and my head swimming in a haze of confusion. It took me a moment to remember the harrowing events that led me here. My heart clenched as I thought of the slavers taking my wife away, and I swore to myself that I would make them pay for the anguish they had caused us. As the reality of the situation settled in, I took stock of my injuries. My arms and legs were battered, but miraculously not broken. A sharp stabbing pain in my ribs indicated that I might have cracked or broken a few, and my head throbbed with the intensity of 1,000 hammers. But I knew I had no choice. I had to push through the pain. Gritting my teeth, I began the arduous task of climbing back up the cliff. Each movement was excruciating, and I had to pause often, gasping for breath and cursing the slavers who had inflicted this torment upon me. As the hours wore on, my progress was slow, and my body screamed in agony, but my determination never wavered. I thought about Lily, her beautiful smile, her gentle touch, and the love we shared. This gave me the strength to carry on. Finally, with bloodied hands and sweat pouring down my face, I pulled myself over the edge of the cliff. Exhausted, I lay on the ground for a moment, allowing myself a brief respite before continuing my mission. With renewed resolve, I got to my feet and began to search for the slavers' trail. The sun was already high in the sky when I finally found the tracks, and I wasted no time in following them. Though my body ached and my injuries protested with every step, I could not let my wife down. As the day wore on, I pushed through the underbrush and used all my tracking skills to keep the slaver's trail in sight. My skills were amateur at best, but the lessons I had learned while hunting with my grandpa as a young boy were enough to help me right now. As dusk approached, I grew weary, but I pressed on, unwilling to give in to the demands of my body. I knew that if I lost them now, I might never see my wife again. The sun dipped below the horizon, and as the world grew dark, my pursuit led me into a forest. The trees stood tall, their bare branches reaching for the sky like desperate, grasping hands. The once thriving underbrush had long since withered away, leaving only scattered patches of dry, brittle vegetation that crumbled underfoot. The forest now resembled a graveyard, a testament to the fragility of nature and the destructive power of mankind. Despite the forest's lifeless appearance, the eerie silence was occasionally broken by the distant cries of the few resilient creatures that had managed to adapt to the harsh conditions. These survivors, like myself, clung to existence in a world that had been pushed to the brink. Although I was determined to press on, a lack of light made it increasingly difficult to navigate. My eyes strained to discern any signs of the slavers or their trail, but the blackness seemed to swallow up any hope of progress. As I stumbled forward, I suddenly felt the ground give way beneath me, and I was enveloped in a sensation of weightlessness. Panic surged through me as I fell through the air, my heart pounding in my chest. I braced for impact, my body tensing in anticipation of the pain that would surely follow. I crashed onto the hard, cold floor. The fall left me winded and disoriented, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I took in my surroundings. I had fallen only a few feet into what seemed to be an underground bunker. It was small and cramped, the walls lined with dusty shelves and rusted metal lockers. I stood slowly. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I whispered into the empty room. It was a small space, and surely no one was there, but it felt, I don't know, necessary to ask. I waited a beat before I allowed myself to move into scavenging mode. I walked slowly around the room, quickly searching through drawers and filing cabinets for anything helpful. The room itself was probably 20 feet by 20 feet, enough space for the essentials, like a toilet, cot, and a small kitchenette. Certainly not something you'd want to spend a prolonged period of time in. Lying on a makeshift table, I spotted a hunting rifle, its barrel gleaming dully in the faint light. Beside it lay a small box of ammunition, containing a few dozen rounds, and a modest pocket knife lay beside it. My heart swelled. I was finally catching a break. Though it was a small arsenal, it was certainly more than I had before. I spent a few hours in the bunker, closing the roof hatch and taking advantage of the relative safety it provided. I had found a sling for the rifle and a small box of old granola which I happily ate a few handfuls of. I did not want to waste any time, but I knew I would be no good to anyone if I didn't get at least a little sleep. I laid back on the cot and set a little cooking timer that lay beside it for 2 hours. Jolted awake by the ringing of the alarm, I quickly gathered my newfound supplies, throwing the little timer into my bag, and prepared to continue my pursuit. I climbed back up through the open hatch, my body still aching but fueled by the food and sleep I was able to enjoy. With the rifle slung over my shoulder and the pocket knife tucked securely in my belt, I set out once more. At this point, it had been nearly an hour since leaving the bunker. While dawn was mere minutes away, darkness still choked the forest. I began to notice unsettling signs of a presence stalking me. Twigs snapped ominously behind me, and indistinct noises haunted the edges of my perception. But it was still too dark to figure out what was around. My heart raced, and paranoia began to take root in my mind. I could feel the creeping dread growing with every step, my imagination conjuring twisted, terrifying images of the creature that was surely following me. The more I dwelled on the stories I had heard from other survivors, the more I became convinced that a horrifying entity was out to get me. The forest seemed to close in around me, the gnarled branches casting eerie shadows that danced in the corner of my vision. Every rustle of leaves or distant cry of an animal sounded like the monstrous aberration I believed was just moments away from revealing itself. The tension and anxiety weighed heavily on me, making it difficult to breathe. I knew that I needed to focus on finding Lily, but the fear of the unknown entity kept gnawing at my thoughts. I struggled to maintain my sanity as I pressed on through the forest, haunted by the whispers of madness echoing in my mind. Despite my growing paranoia, I forced myself to continue, knowing that I couldn't abandon Lily to the slavers. At this point, thankfully, the sun had started to rise, and with the glowing light I felt a measure of relief as the shadows began to retreat. But the feeling of being stalked persisted, and I knew deep down that the creature was still there, lurking in the remaining shadows. Suddenly, a low growl pierced the silence, shattering any illusion of safety. I spun around, barely catching a glimpse of the twisted, grotesque form before it lunged at me. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. It charged me on all fours. Panic seized me as I fumbled to raise the hunting rifle and fired it wildly. The creature shrieked in pain but continued to chase me, driven by an unnatural fury. My mind raced as I attempted to put distance between us, but it was impossibly fast. With my heart pounding in my ears, I managed to fire another shot just as the creature pounced. The bullet struck it, but it wasn't enough to stop its momentum. We both fell to the ground, the rifle slipping from my grasp as I tried to fend off the creature's snapping jaws with my bare hands. "Get off me!" I screamed, desperation giving me the strength to hold it at bay. The creature's putrid breath filled my nostrils, and its dead, soulless eyes bore into mine, a promise of my impending doom. With my free hand, I fumbled for the pocket knife on my belt, praying that I could reach it before the creature's jaws found their mark. As I pulled the knife free, I drove it into the creature's side, over and over again, each stab fueled by my anger and my will to survive. "Not today!" I roared, my voice breaking under the strain. Finally, the creature shuddered and slumped over, the light in its eyes fading as it drew its last ragged breath. Exhausted and trembling, I pushed the lifeless carcass off me and scrambled to my feet. As I stood over the body, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the gruesome scene, revealing the creature for what it truly was: a poor, emaciated bear, driven to madness by hunger and the desperate conditions of the post-collapse world. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the once noble creature. At that moment, as I looked down at the pitiful remains of the bear, I couldn't help but wonder what other animals survivors had mistaken for monsters. The stress and trauma of living in the wake of the Great Collapse had shattered our minds, making us vulnerable to our most ancient fears. It seemed like the darkness of our new reality had breathed life into the fairy tales and legends we had long believed to be mere fiction. I realized now that the wasteland had a way of twisting our perceptions, bringing out the worst in us and the world around us. The monster I had feared and fought was not some supernatural being, but simply a product of the harsh environment and my own shattered psyche. With a deep sigh, I shouldered the hunting rifle and pressed on. It took hours of painstaking tracking, but finally I spotted the slavers' encampment in the distance. Using the scope on my rifle, I observed the slavers' encampment. Their makeshift fortress was surrounded by jagged metal walls and housed a handful of tents and thrown together shacks made of various materials. The camp was well fortified, and there were about a dozen slavers within, at least that I could see. To have any chance, I would need to neutralize as many guards as possible without raising the alarm. I would need to wait. I needed every advantage I could have, and the dark could help mask my movements and approach. I lowered the rifle and removed my backpack, pouring the items onto the dirt before me. As I took stock of what I had, a plan began to form. As night fell, I felt a growing sense of urgency. I knew that every moment I hesitated was another moment Lily and the other captives that I had observed were in danger. I decided it was time to make my move. Crouched low to the ground, I silently approached the outer perimeter of the camp, using the cover of darkness to my advantage. I patiently waited for my moment to strike, and soon my patience paid off. 2 patrolling slavers appeared, their hushed conversation barely audible over the sound of their heavy boots crunching on the dry earth. As the pair approached my position, I gripped the knife tightly in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. The slavers were mere feet away now, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of their lantern. I took a deep breath. In a flash, I lunged from the shadows, driving the blade of my knife deep into the throat of the nearest slaver. Blood gushed from the wound as he gasped in shock, his eyes wide with terror. As his companion turned to face me, I quickly withdrew the knife and plunged it into his abdomen, twisting the blade. The second slaver's eyes went wide, with pain and surprise, his mouth opening to cry out, but I clamped my hand over it, muffling his screams. I held him close, watching the light in his eyes fade as life drained from his body. Soon, both slavers lay lifeless on the ground, their blood pooling beneath them. It was a gruesome and brutal beginning, but it was all so necessary. With the 2 patrolling slavers eliminated, I pressed on, moving stealthily around the perimeter of the camp. As I passed each makeshift building, I could hear the muffled cries and desperate pleas of the captives. I approached the main entrance of the camp and noticed a small group of slavers gathered around a campfire, their laughter echoing through the night. Carefully, I pulled the kitchen timer from my bag, setting it for a 2-minute countdown. My heart raced as I crept closer to the group, the sound of their laughter drowning out the quiet ticking of the timer. I tossed it into a nearby pile of crates and debris, then retreated to a nearby hiding spot, waiting for the alarm to ring out. The timer abrupted in a cacophony of shrill beeps. The slavers leaped to their feet, their laughter replaced by confusion and panic. They scrambled to investigate the source of the noise, leaving the entrance to the camp unguarded. Seizing the opportunity, I darted in, using the chaos to slip into the shadows. As the slavers searched for the source of the alarm, I set to work starting small fires around the camp, using dried brush and debris as a kindling. The flames quickly spread, casting eerie shadows across the camp and adding to the confusion. With the slavers' attention focused on the fires and the inexplicable noise, I made my way to the captives and searched frantically for Lily among them. My heart raced as I spotted her, huddled in a makeshift cell. Relief washed over me, and I rushed to her side. "Lily, I was so scared I wouldn't find you in time," I confessed, my voice cracking. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "Shh," she interrupted gently, placing her hand on my cheek and pressing closer into me. "I knew you'd come," she whispered into my ear, her voice trembling. "I never stopped believing in you." I held her close. "I'll always come for you, Lily, no matter what." Hey, hurry up, come on," urged one of the nearby captives as he rattled the door to his cell. Just then, a shout rang out in the camp. "Over there! Someone's at the cells!" I had to buy Lily and the others time. "Lily, get them! I shouted. Gripping the hunting rifle tightly, I took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the cover of a nearby tent, ready to face the slavers head-on. The first slaver I saw was a burly man, his face twisted with rage as he charged at me with a spiked bat. I took aim and fired, the shot ringing out and the bullet striking him in the chest. He stumbled and fell to the ground, gasping for air before going still. I quickly chambered another round and began taking shots at a group of slavers who were still making their way from the center of camp. Thankfully, I was able to drop a handful before running out of ammunition. I turned back to the first slaver and quickly retrieved the bat from his lifeless grasp, and not a moment too soon. A second slaver emerged from the smoke and chaos, wielding a length of rebar. I was able to sidestep his wild swing before countering with a crushing blow from the bat. It connected with a sickening crunch, the man's skull caving in as he dropped like a sack of bricks. I had no time to catch my breath as a third slaver rushed at me, wielding a makeshift knife. I struggled to pull the bat free from the dead slaver's skull, but I was out of time. The slaver slashed at me, and I took a clean cut across my back. Ignoring the pain, I let go of the bat, spun around, and then thrust my pocket knife into his throat, feeling the warm blood gush over my hand. He gurgled and clutched at his neck, collapsing to his knees. A fourth slaver appeared, his eyes wild and bloodshot as he hurled a Molotov cocktail in my direction. I narrowly dodged the flames, feeling the heat singe my skin as I rolled out of the way. He then charged me, attempting to tackle me, but I was able to dodge out of the way. As he passed, his momentum caused him to trip over one of his dead comrades, and he tumbled right into one of the on-fire tents. He let out a guttural scream, flailing, trying to untangle himself from the burning tent, before eventually growing silent. More slavers poured in. I fought them off with every weapon at my disposal, using their own tools against them. As I battered one man with a spiked bat, I saw another charging at me with a machete. I quickly grabbed the pistol that was holstered on the battered man's hip and fired a single shot into the charging man's head. He crumpled over, blood pouring from the wound where his eye used to be. I was a whirlwind of violence and fury, pushing my body past its limits as I fought for our survival. Each slaver that approached me was met with the same ruthless determination, whether it was a bullet, a knife, or a bone-crunching blow from a scavenged weapon. Finally, the last slaver fell, his body broken and battered, and I stood there, gasping for breath and drenched in blood. The camp was now entirely engulfed in flames, the fires I had started earlier spreading unchecked, consuming everything in their path. Dropping a machete, I stumbled back towards Lily and the captives, my body screaming in pain, and as the adrenaline began to wear off, I became acutely aware of the deep gash across my back, and the numerous other injuries I had sustained in the brutal fight. I staggered closer, my vision starting to blur at the edges. "Lily, it's done," I croaked, my voice barely audible above the crackling flames and chaos of the burning camp. She rushed to my side, her eyes wide with alarm as she took in the extent of my injuries. "Thomas, you're hurt. We need to get you out of here," she cried, her voice trembling. The captives, now freed, gathered around us, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and concern. With Lily's help, they steadied me and began to guide me away from the camp. My legs threatened to buckle beneath me as the pain intensified, but I refused to give in. I had come too far and fought too hard to let my injuries get the better of me now. As we moved farther away from the camp, I could feel my strength waning, the world around me fading in and out of focus. I tried to hold on, to stay conscious for Lily's sake, but my body could take no more. my vision went black, and I fell to the ground, succumbing to the darkness as it enveloped me. Time has a way of healing even the deepest wounds. It's been nearly 5 years since I rescued my wife Lily from the clutches of the slavers, and since we first arrived at the thriving community in Boston. A place that had somehow managed to maintain a semblance of civilization in the face of the collapse. With each passing year, the community grew stronger, fortified by the resolve of its people. Among them, I had found a purpose, a place where I could use my skills and experience to help rebuild society. I taught people how to hunt, and I served almost as a officer role in a lot of ways. No longer was I the haunted, broken man who had traversed the wasteland in search of his wife. In this new world, I was Thomas, a respected member of the community who played a vital role in the ongoing efforts to restore the broken world. Lily and I had built our life together, our love for each other growing stronger with each passing day. We weathered unimaginable hardships, but we had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever before. I looked around at the community that we had helped build, at the faces of the people who had become our family, and I knew that we had something truly precious that we found in the aftermath of the collapse. A place where we could begin to heal and rebuild, together. The world was still a dangerous and uncertain place, its future hanging in the balance as humanity struggled to find its footing once more. But in the faces of our son and the children who played alongside him, I saw the promise of a new generation. One that would grow up with the knowledge and the determination to create a better world, free from the darkness and despair of the past. I leaned back on the bench, putting my arm around Lily. I watched our son play in the courtyard, his laughter ringing through the air like a beacon of hope.